So this seems to be somewhat of a loaded and a little bit of a confrontational title, which to an extent it is, because I kind of have a lot to vent about this, I think. But hopefully I'll do this in somewhat of an open-ended way, in a way in which answers, of course, will not be rendered absolutely, but rather hopefully evoke opportunities for everyone to think more and to question often. I was very impressed recently with, or very intrigued with an op-ed piece that I read in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago by Brian Greene, who is an author, and everyone, big fans of Brian Greene here, who is an author and professor of physics and mathematics at Columbia. And he starts this op-ed by basically commenting on something that is kind of a schoolyard factoid, and that is that the light we are seeing from stars is billions of years old. That some of the stars whose light we're seeing on any given starry night, those stars don't even exist anymore. It's just taken their light so long to get here. And so in essence, when we're looking at the night sky, we're looking into the past. But Greene also tells us something interesting in this op-ed about the future. Now, without getting too bogged down in relativity theories and cosmological constants and dark energy, and you can read the article if you want, we know from many sources, including a character who plays the young neurotic Woody Allen in Annie Hall, that the universe is expanding and constantly. You remember that gives that kid a lot of stress in the doctor's office. Now, scientists assumed that gravitational force would slow the rate of expansion. But what they actually discovered is that the rate of expansion is accelerating because something known as repulsive gravity. Now, that's not a judgment. That's just observational. But here's really what I consider to be the trippy and the troubling part of this observation. That billions of years from now, God willing, there's still humanity around, that galaxies that are not in our general vicinity will be racing from us faster than the speed of light. And so their light will not reach us. And so for all intents and purposes, those galaxies will cease to exist. Not essentially, but from our perspective. No device or telescope that will ever be invented will be able to transcend this physical reality. So astronomers will no longer be able to see the past, as we kind of do today. They will only behold, as Greene calls it, the dark void. So what's the quandary for future astronomers? If records exist about our night sky today, as it is, do these scientists accept that there was a sky that they no longer can observe or prove on faith? Or do they look around to their surroundings and theorize about some island universe within a small cluster of galaxies surrounded by emptiness, which is a conception of the cosmos that we know to be wrong today? So Greene concludes, quote, "We've grown accustomed to the idea that with sufficient hard work and dedication, there's no barrier to how fully we can both grasp reality and confirm our understanding. But by gazing far into space, we've captured a handful of starkly informative photons, a cosmic telegram billions of years in transit. And the message, echoing across the ages, is clear. Sometimes nature guards her secrets with the unbreakable grip of physical law. Sometimes the true nature of reality beckons from just beyond the horizon." Now, I found this to be an apt metaphor and an apt introduction to the larger subject that I want to talk about today, which is the futile pursuit of a godless morality. So what's the challenge today? And we have multicolored test tubes versus the Ten Commandments here. The development of scientific methods. Science and everything that it encompasses is based on observation and evidence and theorizing. And this has been an indispensable tool for human beings, especially over the last 300-400 years, to understand the world, increase our sense of predictability. And science, no doubt, has significantly improved the quality and length of our lives. Science provides us with a consensual and dispassionate and systematic basis for sharing knowledge and pursuing truth. But as my introductory example offers, if science can't tell us everything about the nature of even the physical world that it purports to know, it certainly falls short of explaining, let alone revealing the truth of many aspects of human experience that transcend the observable or quantifiable. And for a lot of people, particularly those who are scientists, who embrace scientism as an ideology, skeptics, and now atheists, the reliance upon science as the only avenue to truth, as the most rational and therefore the most reliable solution to all human challenges, questions, and debates, risks science becoming, ironically, the same kind of religious zealotry that is often decried by skeptics, rationalists, and atheists. Reason and science did indeed enable us to rise above the murderousness and the muck of superstition and fanaticism over the last 300, 400, 500 years. But to see scientific progress in a zero-sum death match with faith and religion is to both carelessly disregard a significant and tangible element of the human condition, and again, ironically, it's to raise up the ideals of a kind of materialism that really is regressive. One of the great gifts of Western civilization, of Western religions in particular, was that it allows us to rise above material concepts of the holy and to embrace abstractions, which are more challenging, but are more authentic. And so the materialism, the scientism of so many, ironically, is a reversion back to that at least in this case, monotheistic era. So I'm going to focus particularly on the current darling. I just love the word nabob, that whole Bill Sapphire nabob of negativism. It doesn't exactly, but I like the word. Anyway, I'm going to focus particularly on the current darling amongst what I like to call the four horsemen of the neo-atheist apocalypse, including Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris. And I want to focus on Harris because of his notoriety, but also because of his stridency and his embrace of a myopic and absolutist and arrogant neo-atheism, or what I more tellingly think should be called not neo-atheism, but a neo-paganism. To borrow an immortal parallelism from the rock group The Who, meet the new atheists, same as the old atheists, but this guy with better hair, publicists, and literary agents. So, Harris first made a name for himself with a book about 3 or 4 years ago called The End of Faith, in which he says, one, and I'm just obviously going to give you just a brief overview, but hopefully you'll go and study, as they say in Judaism. I'll tell you a little bit and then go and study. He made a name for himself with his first text, The End of Faith. You kind of know where he's going just from the title, right? It's pretty obvious. So he basically makes the following 3 assumptions. One, that all religion, and he does speak in this overgeneralizing way. Okay, he's not nuanced at all. All religion is irrational. All religion is exclusivist, intolerant, and thus dangerous. Not only dangerous, but it leads inexorably to the worst violence plaguing our civilization. If you want to look at the root of all violence in the world, Harris will tell us it's religion. Now, Harris does a little bit of concession here. He concedes that maybe there's a difference between fundamentalist fanatics and moderates. But the irony is that he has more contempt and concern about moderates than he does about fundamentalists, because he feels like moderates are trying to have it both ways and are betraying both sides. He says modernists are betraying reason, that they should know better and that they embrace reason, but they also are betraying the integrity of their faith. That integrity may be perverse in his mind, but they're betraying faith and they're betraying reason. And so moderates, by Harris's definition in The End of Faith, lack all bona fides because their faith is a delusion of what's delusional. and do a disservice to modernity mainly by giving cover to extremists. In other words, moderates essentially make religion seem reasonable and so end up covering up for or even obscuring the fanaticism and the violence of religious fundamentalists. And I put a little picture of Davy and Goliath here because how can such a cute claymation dog and little boy be irrational, violent, and intolerant? Okay. Anyway, okay. I had to put something here visually, right? All right. I think there are some, I say slugging the softballs because I think as is the case with so much of Harris's work, despite its popularity, there are some brief and simple counters and arguments against much of what he says. And a lot of it is rooted in the fact that his analysis is completely shallow. He seems to be saying something that's popular. There's an upsurge in kind of skepticism about religion in general, whether it's concerns about what's going on in certain church organizations or Islamic fundamentalism or whatever it is. He's taking advantage of that crescendoing tide of skepticism and concern and anger and contempt and trying to give it an ideological basis that I think is quite shallow. One, Harris is completely ignorant of the historical development of religion, even particularly within the last 500 years, in which faith and reason have been in a dynamic tension, have been in a very productive dialectic, and have forged a constructive synthesis. The kind of reformation that took place in Christianity and in Judaism, the way in which modern philosophers have sought to meld faith with philosophy, has produced some very high-level, substantive, thoughtful, inspiring, erudite opinions and conclusions. And for Harris, it's as if that stuff doesn't exist. Harris also is a collectivist in that he takes the acts of a few and overgeneralizes them to encompass the many. He conflates fundamentalism, which, if we study it in its current forms, is a modern phenomenon, really over the last 100 or 200 years. He takes fundamentalism and biblical literalism, and he conflates it with the essence of all religion and all faith. And even a cursory examination of the record reveals deep, substantive struggles with reason and with the other on the part of people of faith. Thus, Harris, mirror, mirror on the wall, becomes a mirror image, ironically, of that which he decries. He is a secular fundamentalist who, in good fundamentalist fashion, he's playing out the script. He ignores history and he ignores the conceptual complexity of religion and faith. Again, precisely according to the script of the fundamentalism that he decries. Like the proverbial last Japanese soldier fighting in a cave on a Pacific island years after the war is over, he is a recent expositor of the thoroughly discredited warfare thesis, a thesis which has been, thank God, relegated to the ash heap of ideology, which asserts that there is an eternal, inimicable relationship between science and faith. Most modern open thinkers understand that it's not black and white. Harris didn't get the memo. In his most recent book, the one which is making the rounds all over the blogosphere and the media these days, and the kind of more bourgeois intellectual gatherings, his new book is called The Moral Landscape, and I say it's called Round 2. He's following up, according to Harris, The End of Faith, because he wants to answer critics who, throughout his book tour concerning the end of faith, continued to stubbornly assert in his mind that faith and reason should dominate discussions of morality, should dominate an area of human experience that defies empiricism and quantification. Harris says, no, we shouldn't concede this to religion. As a matter of fact, he says it's a dangerous illusion to assert that science can't determine values. He thinks to somehow exclude science from determining broad values is not just unwise, but a dangerous illusion. Harris goes on, and again, I'm oversimplifying this, but if you read it, it's not much more than this with a lot of studies of brain chemistry. He says basically values are little more than facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. Values are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures, and in essence, that morality can be reduced to a concern about experience. All of morality, what all these scientists and theologians have been doing for thousands of years, basically, if you watch someone do stuff and you record it, you basically have an insight into morality. The bottom line is that the values which comprise morality are essentially, in Harris's view, reducible to facts that determine the truth of how human beings best flourish. And going even further, Harris says that the conditions of well-being, and thus the truth of morality, can be observed, measured, and theorized about, and thus manipulated through neuroscience. Essentially, you take the pill. I mean, this is the implications of his argument. He doesn't go this far, but it is absolutely the implications that one day we will be able to control neuroscience the way that we do with Prozac and other SSRIs and other psychopharmaceutical substances, and we will be able to change the values of a society out of a pill bottle. I don't know if he's a secret spokesman for Big Pharma, but that seems to be the implication of what he's saying. Before I continue, some thoughts about, I gave you the kind of the run-up to Harris and my concerns about him, before I get to some positive assertions of why I think he's wrong and where another direction, but some very brief thoughts about Harris's assumptions here that morality can basically be reduced to observations of experience, understanding the nature of well-being, and then manipulating that well-being through neuroscience. Did you have a thought or a question about that?
I recently finished reading this, and the whole book, and I read The End of Faith and Later to a Christian Nation. And the whole book is, he's got this, even when he doesn't say so in so many words, he's involved in this running battle with David Hume's is-ought distinction. And when you look at it from that standpoint, if you know a little bit about Hume, you realize that and this is my assessment of the book, the entire book is very articulate, but a very enormous exercise in question begging. Because, yeah, he says, the point that he made, the values are facts about well-being. But why should I be concerned with my or anyone else's well-being? Why should I be concerned with that? Now you're back to hot language again. Why should I give a rip about your well-being?
Or even, is well-being the sum total of the human good or the societal good? And who determines it? And how is it determined? Right. And is it just an analysis of brain chemistry? Would that do it? Please.
Yeah. I'm wondering what his experience is with fundamentalism. There have been a lot of people who have been hurt by fundamentalism, spiritually. Okay, now then some of them do what he does, but others will move on to a spiritual reality that is helpful. And so he's, in a sense, he hasn't moved on beyond his antagonism. You know, he's still in that paradigm, not changing the basic structure. Leon
Wieseltier, one of the editors of the New Republic, wrote about all of these books a year or two ago, that essentially these four guys working out their daddy issues in the most existential way. And I think, you can look at it, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, please.
You said fundamentalism is a modern concept?
Yes.
Yes.
What about like hashish eaters? The hashish eaters, the assassins, society of assassins, fundamentalist assassins, suicidal missions?
What I think what I was, and this is kind of something that's...
That was like 10,000 AD.
Well, listen, there were always people who acted fundamentally, but the kind of fundamentalism that we have today, particularly Islamic fundamentalism, which oftentimes, and Christian fundamentalism, Jewish fundamentalism is, we have less people and less venue to do too much damage with it, although we have, don't get me wrong. But Christian and Jewish Christian and Islamic fundamentalism as we experience it today, and as established as the boogeyman for Sam Harris, is the product of theological reaction over the last 100 years. From Kutab in Egypt to 18th and 19th century fundamentalists in England, and particularly in the United States. And so that's what I'm saying about kind of fundamentalism as he is looking at it as a modern phenomenon. Please.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll just say thank you for engaging this topic. I think it's actually probably, if not the most important discussion going on at the book fair today, one of the most. And I'll also just say I appreciate one of the introductory slides you had about the challenge between the test tubes and the Ten Commandments, because the discussion goes way back further than Sam Harris, obviously. Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, right, even before him.
Absolutely. And they do a much better job.
Right. So I appreciate you tying the discussion about ethics and morality to epistemology.
Beautiful. Thank you. One more, and then I'm going to continue because I have a time matron here. Please.
I don't like Sam Harris. He's confronting, antagonistic. He's a hard person to like. But he has many virtues. Many virtues. It is not just that he has a battle with religion. He also battles relativism in science. Two places to go to really find out some interesting things about Harris and his system of seeing the world. One is the Science Network, where they had a conference on cognitive behavior in San Diego, and you'll see him there as the minority, with well-known science on the panel, as the minority on the panel saying, the most important thing that science can do today is become involved in what well-being means, in what the good life is, instead of just brushing off. It doesn't make any difference if you're over here, the good life is so-and-so, if you're over, he says we're humans. We're certain kinds of people. A second, that's on the Science Network. A second place is on the web, theedge.org, where they have quite a lengthy discussion of leaders in the field of morality and science and what is going on in that area. It's quite expansive, it's quite large, and it's really worth looking at.
Yeah, he has a real problem, particularly with Francis Collins, because he has a huge problem with Francis Collins, who dares to be a scientific, an accomplished scientific expert, but also a person of deep religious faith.
His most common enemy, person is antagonist. It's not a person of faith. It's another atheist by the name of Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T.
Yeah.
And that comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, it's not that science can offer nothing. It's just that science doesn't offer the only thing. And Harris, I think the problem is that Harris is playing out more his contempt and his kind of monomaniacal anger and aggression about religion, which I think in many ways dilutes, drowns out some of the more cogent things that he has to say about scientific relativism. And that's what I meant about protesting too much, is that I think Harris is so inured of his attack and criticism, more than criticism, his attack of religion, that he essentially diminishes the true nature of morality by reducing it only to, in his opinion, physiology, the sloshing around of brain chemicals causing electrical currents and activity that can be monitored and then somehow quantified, and then values associated with it.
On almost every page of that book, I kept thinking, going back to the thought, this boy needs to read more Dostoevsky.
No, absolutely. So amongst the myriad possible arguments for a reasoned, thoughtful morality based on faith and reason that views morality as something more than sloshing neurochemicals, I wanted to stay with me here just for a couple minutes. I'm only going to take the three most difficult thinkers in Western philosophy and just touch upon a couple of their key insights that I think speak to the indispensability of God when making moral assessments and understanding morality. The first is A Tale of Two Emmanuels. I'm going to talk about Immanuel Kant and Emmanuel Levinas. Emmanuel, by the way, in Hebrew means God is with us, so I don't think that's an accident. All right. Kant, very briefly, go and study. I'm going to talk about this for 30, 45 seconds. You really need to go and study. Have another book and some secondary sources, because Kant's pretty dense. But basically Kant says, and I'm being admittedly overly simplistic here, but I'm getting to some of the key essences as it bears upon my discussion today. Kant says basically that we can't know God through sense impressions, and we can't prove God's existence. We just can't. That we perceive the world through sense impressions, so we can't really know God because God is not evident through sense impressions. However, Kant says that it is rational to believe that God exists because it's a necessary postulate, and it's necessary to postulate the existence of God, because God is what he calls a regulative idea. God is one of those organizing ideas that brings unity to our experience. It's a tool that enables us to understand and perceive the world, to integrate it, to analyze it, to understand it. And that we need to have these regulative key ideas like God in order to make sense of our experience, particularly God as an originator, God as a first cause. Now, where the rubber meets the road in terms of Kant's understanding of morality is what he calls practical reason. The critique of pure reason talks about that perceptual stuff I was talking about. His critique of practical reason is where the rubber meets the road in terms of our discussion today. Kant basically said that acting morally is to adhere to a universal law above all other motives. Acting morally means there's a universal law, you're going to attend to it, and there are no other motives, power structures, relationships that should impinge on that. And Kant's categorical imperative, one of the foundations of our understanding of morality in Western culture, is act only in accord with a principle which you would at the same time will to be a universal law. This is a Kantian way of basically putting something that we've seen in other traditions. In Judaism, the most important element in the Torah, the three words that are the distillation of all of Torah, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Hillel later on says, do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. And what does Jesus tell us? One more variant. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So this notion of acting in the world only in a way that you could take that act and live by it and apply it as a universal moral principle should be the guiding force, the foundation of our morality. And this is the ultimate expression of freedom. When we act in this way, purely, that is how we act most autonomously in the world. Now, the bottom line for Kant is, but there's a tension, unfortunately. And the tension is, we want to be virtuous. We want to act morally. We want to use our reason to compel us, to guide us in doing good things. But there's another part of us, a part that pursues desires and happiness. And so we have virtue, morality, and reason, kind of the angel on one shoulder, and we have happiness, which is not a bad thing, but happiness, desires, impulses, appetites on the other. And so Kant says essentially the way in which we can solve that tension is that we have to postulate three main ideas that need to be the foundation of our reasonable understanding. One is God, the sense that there's a power that will guarantee that virtue will be rewarded with happiness at some time. Immortality, that there basically is an infinite time span to pursue virtue, so you don't have to worry about it all happening now. And that virtue emerges from our freedom to act. And freedom is, virtue is our freedom to act in such a way that we are both pursuing the vision of God and doing it within the time frame of immortality. And Kant basically says that without these postulates, without these three assumptions, there can be no morality. Now, again, very briefly, I think what we see here is Kant's less concerned, and I think this is an incredible admission, and a concession on his part. This is a guy for whom reason was foundational. But he says, I'm not so concerned with proving God. People before him, Descartes, others, were concerned about using reason to prove God and to thwart, not only to thwart religious fundamentalists who only found God in faith or religious institutions, but also to thwart whatever atheists were willing to speak at the risk of being burned at the stake at that time. But Kant basically said Kant's basically saying, I'm not concerned about proving God. I'm going to postulate that God exists because it secures a moral structure. So in many ways, the idea of God is more critical than the reality of God. Now, those could be equivalent because perceptions become reality, But Kant doesn't care about trying to prove God. Kant says we need God in order for there to be a moral structure. I think that's, certainly there are critiques of Kant, but I think that's compelling. The next tough guy to unravel here, Emmanuel Levinas. Again, the intersection of God and morality as inextricable. Basically, Levinas, and again, go and read, take advanced level courses, and you'll flesh this out. But basically, Levinas says that just encountering the face, the bare fact of another person, radically obligates us to that other person. Whether we're going to get quid pro quo reciprocity, whether someone else is telling us to do it, whether we feel inspired out of noblesse oblige or out of guilt, none of that matters. What matters is the bare fact, the fundamental singular encounter of another person's face, and not their physiognomy, but just their totality of being, radically obligates us not only to help another person, but also to submit, to subjugate ourselves to their needs. And it supersedes anything. So much in our lives, whether it's the marketplace or even religion, and morality is about quid pro quo. I do this because hopefully I'm going to get a return someday. Levinas said, that doesn't even matter. We have to, when we encounter another person's face, it so takes us out, tears us out of the normal kinds of exchange and relationships that are a part of human life, that we can do nothing but radically submit to the needs of another. Now, we're free to ignore that, but it does not make the need to, the radical obligation disappear. Just like we can ignore God and say God isn't there, but guess what? God doesn't need our approval.
That's right.
God will remain whether we acknowledge it or not. And there's a wonderful, and where does God come into this? In the face, we see not only the most basic, compelling need of another, but we also have traces of the face of God. And I love this quote here. The interhuman, that is the interaction between human beings, is an interface, a double axis where what is of the world, that is intelligible phenomenon, is juxtaposed with what is not of the world, and that is ethical responsibility. So in other words, our radical obligation to the other that transcends all of the things that we normally use to structure human relationships is not just an ethical responsibility on an earthly level, but because it tears us out of our normal selves, it is a spark of the divine. It is the presence of God. Being in an ethical relationship with another human being is a way of being in a relationship with God. Not just being in relationship, but acknowledging and conceding to and fulfilling the ethical obligations we have to another. Morality is our pathway to God, and God imbues our responsibilities for morality. And again, I understand this as kind of the necessity of God to augment our moral experience and to appreciate and to experience God. Lastly, I'm really getting down here quickly, Kierkegaard, another easy, we can think about him and it's a bumper sticker. Everything can be reduced to a bumper sticker. Basically, again, I'll do this in 3 minutes and then I'll have some time for questions and maybe I'll give this as a course over a semester. Kierkegaard's paradox here. Basically, Kierkegaard, amongst the many things that he offered, that he thought and wrote about and inspired us with, is a critique of reason and a critique of modernity from the position of faith. Basically, Kierkegaard says God, whether it's Jesus or the Torah or Buddha, he didn't think of Buddha, but he thought of Jesus. God gives us both truth and the condition to receive truth. It's not just revelation, it's the ability to receive that is part of that revelation. But we, again, as limited human beings, are distracted. Humanity is in a constant state of untruth. We are, as Kierkegaard calls it, polemical against the truth by our very nature. He goes into it and calls that sin, but let's put that aside for now. So what's the paradox? The paradox is God, revelation, Jesus, Torah, Buddha, Muhammad, and the Quran, whatever you want to call it, this ultimate truth breaks into our temporal lives and gives us both itself and the condition to receive that truth. But reason is as much a passion as anything else in our lives. We have a passionate reason to know and to control and to understand. And through our passion to know and control and understand through our reason, when we apply that to God, we do God a great disservice. We seek to domesticate God, to make God in our image rather than our being a reflection of God's image. And so however much reason tries to domesticate God, it can't. It gets frustrated because God is, as Kierkegaard calls it, absolutely different. And therein lies the paradox. We are human beings imbued with reason, but we encounter a truth that defies reason. And how do we react? How do we respond? For Kierkegaard, reason must surrender to the paradox. That, by the way, if I ever have a rock band, that's what I'm going to name it, Surrender to the Paradox. I think it's the coolest thing ever. Reason must surrender to the paradox. The absolutely different God, who is so completely different than who we are, can't be understood with reason. God can only be revealed and given. What it is to have faith is to accept the paradox, to accept the gift. Not to simply, as Harris would have it, check your brain at the door and blindly believe, but to struggle. To live a life of faith is to struggle, to agonize, to utilize all aspects of our human selves, our reason, our intuition, our understanding, and our faith, and our sense of things greater than ourselves. And for that synthesis, at its core, to be a, as Kierkegaard coined it, by the way, a leap of faith. The gap between reason and faith must be accepted and not overcome, and we can't overcome it. And I think Kierkegaard points out very cogently the notion that if we only rely on reason, it in and of itself becomes a kind of idolatry. And if we only rely on reason, we have erected an impediment to discovering higher truth by other means. Finally, influence, this is me, by the way. This is no great concept here. It's just my sense based on things I've studied in my own kind of gut as a practicing clergy person. I really resonate with Kant, Levinas, and Kierkegaard about the indispensability of God for morality. I think there's a basic human need to be accountable to something. That's our limitation, the way we're hardwired, whatever you want to call it. To be accountable to something larger than ourselves, to both govern our appetites and toward which we can aspire to pursue our noblest passions and our noblest ideas. Skeptics and atheists will often say, well, the greater good, loving your fellow human being just because they're a human being, put God aside, that should be enough to compel people to do the right thing. But I think even for the most idealistic and altruistic amongst us, our human capacity for juicy rationalizations and deluding relativizing cannot reliably and uniformly compel ethical behavior. We need a cosmic parent, one on whom we can project our ideals and one in the face of whom we can be cautious and we can defer in terms of authority. And that is the best chance, I believe, for compelling human behavior most widely and most enduringly. In its form and in its essence, God is a time-tested object of our projections and authority to which we are in relation as a guide for our lives. And Morgan Freeman is the best embodiment of God I can think of. Finally, and in the end, not the end of faith, but my end, I think morality is so critical that the need to pursue, to examine as many avenues towards this truth have to be scrutinized, evaluated, purified by the process of debate and distillation. Science has much to say, but faith and religion and abstract ideals have a lot to say as well. And to exclude one at the expense of the other is to do a disservice to the ultimate pursuit of something that is so central to our lives as human beings, that delicate, sacred space between the worldly and the divine. We can exist in that space if we utilize every avenue toward truth. And the trite but true Einstein statement, I think, vis-a-vis specifically the atheists and Harris's contention, science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes. Please. And I will continue after, and I'll be downstairs right after signing my book that covers broader issues than just this, but this as well. Good God, faith for the rest of us. I'll be downstairs signing it. Yes, please.
Instead of putting God, if we put the word virtue at the center, I think we would have a better argument for what's going on. Because let's just take something very simple like smoking tobacco. There was a time when they thought that was okay, it was good. I got films of Ronald Reagan, puffing away and smoking and saying it's a good thing, scientists believe it's a good thing.
And convincing Bonzo to smoke too, so there's some animal rights issues there, I think.
But the virtue of virtuous life, regardless of religion, is what brings us to the center to say, maybe smoking, maybe these activities that we're trying to do are not good, and shouldn't be pursued.
Well, that's kind of a Hellenistic, particularly an Aristotelian notion, that these ultimate pursuits are happiness, honor, or virtue. Another thought, question? Please.
Yeah, are you familiar with Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain at Harvard?
No.
Okay. Well then, my next question, I don't need to ask.
Clearly, I will be Googling him when I get home. Please, thank you.
He has some interesting comments on Sam Harris that essentially says that we can be good without God, etc. So I wanted to see if you could reflect on his
I don't know his stuff enough. Can we be good? I think it's possible. Can we be, in my opinion, can we be as enduringly and as effectively and as universally good, gauging goodness just within the sphere of the earthly as opposed to something beyond ourselves? I question that, but I'm biased, right? Please.
What's it all boil down to? I mean, you talk Kant, you talk Kierkegaard, you talk all these big philosophers, but you can't have every person on the planet read those books. Not everybody's going to be able to study philosophy, religion.
But they should.
They can't.
Cannot and should not. We don't have time. People need to produce food. People need to produce goods. People need to do stuff that keeps us alive. A doctor or an EMT doesn't have time to stop.
So we distill this, put it on YouTube, let them watch it on their iPhones, and that's what you do.
Then we don't have time. I mean, you got to boil down a message to a simple statement. There must be something simple, something straightforward, something that can be said in 3 lines that can define morality.
I completely resonate with your need to respond to the quickly atrophying attention spans of modern culture. No, it is. But the issue is, how much do we concede to that without pandering and diminishing the integrity of important ideas?
Yeah.
And that is one of the trends in our society, that we want to boil it down to 3 words, and if you live your whole lives by 3 words, and that is one of the...
Listen, in Judaism, the rabbis, even before the internet and YouTube and, the fact that we only had 22-minute attention spans, that's sitcoms with half-hour sitcoms without the commercials, the rabbis in Judaism, and you have this in a lot of faiths too, basically said you can boil the entire, there's a famous story, this is the last thing I'll end with, I swear, I'll end. There's a famous story of a kind of a smartass who comes to two of the great rabbis. One's Rabbi Shammai, who's more harsh, and one's Rabbi Hillel, who's more lenient. And this smartass comes to Rabbi Shammai and says, "Teach me the entire Torah while I sit on 1 foot." And Shammai says, "Who the hell are you? You're wasting my time," takes a stick and starts beating him and chases him away. The same guy goes to the more lenient, the more inspired, I think, Rabbi Hillel, and says, "Teach me the entire Torah while I stand on 1 foot." And basically what he says is, do not do unto others as you would have them not do unto you. All the rest is commentary. Go and study. So in essence, I think that's the answer to your question is, hook them with something that will compel them now and inspire them to spend less time on Facebook and more time studying Levinus's face. Thank you very much.